January 1944. Hitler's dream of conquering Russia lies in ruins. The Soviets have entered Poland, and in the Ukraine, the Germans are being driven back. In Italy, the Allied armies push up the peninsula toward Rome. British and American forces attempt to flank the Germans with an amphibious landing at Anzio. In the Pacific, intense fighting is pushing the Japanese out of Tarawa, Macon, Kwajalein, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. In Germany, British nighttime bombing raids are hitting the German capital Berlin, while massive American daylight raids pound industrial and military targets in Germany and occupied France. By the fall of 1943, Colonel Hub Zemke's 56th Fighter Group was among the most successful fighter units in the European theater. But the bombing campaign was in trouble. Lackluster results and heavy losses caused some leaders in Washington to question the aims and value of the American bombing raids. And on May 12th, 8th Air Force bombers attacked Germany's synthetic oil plants. In his memoir of the Third Reich, Albert Speer wrote that he would never forget May 12, 1944. He called it the day that Germany lost the technological war. I'm Gary Sinise, and this is Missions That Changed the War. The 56th Fighter Group arrived in England in January 1943, with Lieutenant Colonel Hub Zemke in command. General Ira Eger, head of 8th Bomber Command, rounded up his best unit commanders and sent them to the United States to win over the U.S. Army Air Force leaders and the public. Zemke was part of that team. Zemke arrived home on November 20th, met with the military chiefs, went on a lecture tour and visited his parents in Missoula, Montana, before returning to Washington, D.C. for transit back to England. There he learned that new orders were being prepared to assign him to a stateside post in New York. He desperately wanted to return to the 56th, as he had been promised before leaving England. With his original orders still in hand, he jumped on a transport plane for England and went to Fighter Command headquarters to plead his case. There, General William Kepner told Zemke to disappear for a few days while matters were sorted out. After 5 days of cooling his heels in Edinburgh, Scotland, Zemke was told to return to the 56th and reassume command. He arrived back at Halesworth on January 19, 1944. Zemke never learned exactly what happened at headquarters. He knew only that he could have faced court-martial and loss of his rank in command, and that the incident almost certainly ended his chances for promotion. Lieutenant Robert Shorty Rankin joined the 56th Fighter Group as a replacement pilot in August of 1943. He flew 27 missions without firing a shot.
Not all the pilots were that aggressive. My flight commander, when I first got there, flew with him. We were always top flight, top cover. No matter what went on, we still stayed the top cover. We didn't do anything. And eventually I got that flight. I changed things around, but I was a go type. I was conservative. I didn't want to go. Somebody's right on me, but if I had the opportunity, I'm going now. I'm going to do what I can do. I enjoyed flying, and if you didn't have to worry about the flak, it was kind of a fun thing to do.
On February 6, 1944, Lieutenant Rankin got his first aerial victory. By January 1944, Gunther Rall met for a third time with Adolf Hitler to receive an award from the Führer's hand. This time, the Führer did not talk of victory or of Germany's bright future. This time, Hitler spoke only of the coming Allied invasion. Though German leaders denied it, Rall was certain that Germany had already lost the war, but he would do his duty as a soldier.
We are not philosophers. Yeah? We had the daily engagement. Here's the enemy, here are you, and this we thought from one mission to the other. That's it.
In the Ukraine, Rall and his pilots were holding out against long odds, in constant retreat from Soviet infantry, tanks, and ground attack aircraft. Finally, on March 13, 1944, his Staffel is ordered to fall back to Lemberg in Poland. And so, we leave the USSR, a good 2.5 years after the insanity of Operation Barbarossa was launched. By early 1944, new drop tanks meant that Zemke's fighters could escort the bombers much farther into Germany. The 56th Fighter Group had expanded from 75 to 108 P-47s, and on January 11th, it put up 2 escort groups of 24 fighters each. Hit by more than 100 bogies, the Wolfpack shot down 10 of the enemy with no losses. The British Royal Air Force included several squadrons of Polish pilots who had escaped the German invasion in 1939. Several members of the RAF Polish 315th Squadron asked to join the 56th Fighter Group and were taken in early 1944. They were able pilots with a passion for killing Germans. Colonel Zemke believed strongly in leading from the front, but he also believed that it was his job to train other men to lead as well. The 8th Air Force set the policy for fighter escort.
The American fighter stayed with the bomber. Most fighter groups edged in tight to the bomber configuration.
Knowing this, the German fighters would form up ahead of the bomber stream and attack head-on in waves, trying to force bombers out of the formation where they could be picked off individually.
And Dad went to Kepner and told Kepner, look, I believe we can reshape the air war over Europe by using fighters in a different manner.
Zemke had been quietly disobeying orders and sending his P-47s farther and farther ahead of the bombers, hoping to catch the German fighters as they were forming up. And he saw that it was working. Destroying the Luftwaffe was a prerequisite for the Allied invasion of Europe planned for June. In February, 8th Fighter Command issued a new policy. It allowed the fighters to range away from the bombers to seek out enemy aircraft. It was the go and get 'em order the fighter groups had been waiting for, and the 56th lost no time getting into the act. Returning from an escort mission on February 11th, Zemke led his flight down to attack the enemy airfield at Juvencourt, where they destroyed an Me-109, the group's first ground kill. In late February, the U.S. 8th Air Force in Britain and the U.S. 15th Air Force in Italy launched a series of massive raids against the German aircraft industry. The combined bombing campaign of February 20th to the 26th would become known as Big Week. American bombers flew more than 3,500 sorties and dropped 10,000 tons of bombs on German cities. The purpose of the bombing campaign was twofold: to disrupt German fighter production and to provoke the Luftwaffe into decisive air battles. Losses were heavy on both sides. The Americans lost 226 heavy bombers and 28 fighters. The Germans lost nearly 600 fighter planes. The Americans could replace their losses. The Germans could not. The 56th Fighter Group tallied 59 aerial kills during Big Week and only 2 losses. On February 22nd, Zemke's 61st Squadron became the first fighter squadron in the European theater to reach 100 aerial victories. The bombing raids of Big Week did not stop German aircraft production. The industry was widely dispersed, and in spite of intense Allied bombing, German aircraft production increased throughout the war. Germany's greatest loss during Big Week was the hundreds of experienced fighter pilots who failed to return. They could not be replaced. After Big Week, the Luftwaffe gave up its full-scale attacks on Allied daylight bombers. Germany's fighter forces were now rationed to protect key German cities and installations. Air superiority now belonged to the Allies. In August of 1943, 8th Air Force bombers had attacked German ball bearing factories at Regensburg and Schweinfurt.
And the losses were unacceptable. I think there were 60 bombers lost out of something like a 290 bomber force, plus another 30 or 40 or 50 bombers that returned safely but were no longer usable. And it became apparent you could not conduct operations against Germany in daylight without a fighter escort. The Luftwaffe at that time was still strong. They had drained fighters from the Eastern Front. They had good pilots. They had a good radar system, early warning system. We were in effect defeated in 1943 in the air over Germany with our bombing thing. But they did draw the conclusion that, okay, we need an escort fighter. And so the bombing was diverted to shorter range missions until an escort fighter became available that could take them further into Germany.
In early 1944, the new long-range P-51 Mustang was coming online and drop tanks were increasing the range of the P-47. General Carl Spaatz, commander of U.S. Air Forces in Europe, now had the long-range fighter escort that he needed for his bombing missions.
Spaatz was being pressed by Arnold and the people in Washington. You better get on with prosecuting this war. And as he got range, he began to get into the Ruhr Valley, and he was left with the option of attacking German industry. He wasn't given the option to reach out and attack their oil production.
Germany produced synthetic oil from its vast reserves of coal. Synthetic oil factories supplied most of Germany's oil and all of its aviation fuel.
And the Germans had very smartly put their synthetic oil manufacturing out of the range of any American fighter.
Armament Minister Albert Speer understood that if synthetic oil production was cut off, the day of Germany's defeat could be calculated with mathematical precision. But in February 1944, 8th Air Force fighters could not reach far enough. The Luftwaffe still had claws, and Spaatz could not send his bombers unescorted into that cauldron. The synthetic oil plants would have to wait. The 56th Fighter Group ended the month of February with twice as many aerial victories as its nearest rival, the 4th Fighter Group, and fewer losses.
Dad named the 56 Zemke's Wolfpack. 4th Fighter Group is known as the Eagles. Dad was called the Werewolf of the 4th Fighter Group. There was a rivalry similar to baseball scores, okay? The Yankees versus Boston, this sort of thing. And the press began to pick up on it, and it was known as a rivalry.
Zemke encouraged the rivalry to motivate his pilots. With the P-51 and with drop tanks on the P-47, Spaatz had the long-range escort he needed to launch a daylight raid on Berlin. On March 6, 1944, more than 700 bombers escorted by 800 fighters attacked the German capital city. The German air forces fought savagely in what was possibly the largest air battle of the war. The 8th lost 69 bombers and 11 fighters, and many of the aircraft that did return were too badly damaged to ever fly again. The Germans lost 160 fighters that day, 1/8 of the fighter force that rose to defend Berlin. 2 days later, the 8th returned to Berlin with over 600 bombers. The 56th Fighter Group destroyed 30 German fighters. 5 of its pilots were lost. Lieutenant Robert Rankin of the 61st Squadron claimed his 2nd and 3rd victories that day. In all, the 8th Air Force flew 23 bombing missions during the month of March 1944. Its losses were heavy, 349 bombers, but German losses were heavier. In February, the Luftwaffe lost 18% of its pilot strength, 225 killed and 141 wounded. In March, the Reich Defense Force lost 22% of its pilots, 229 killed or missing, and 103 wounded. The Americans could replace their losses. The Germans could not.
When these big bomb threats came, 8th Air Force or the 15th from the south, we had tremendous problems already because we were in war already 3-4 years. And just to give you numbers, during the war, Germany trained and the German Air Force trained and put in operation 20,000 fighter pilots throughout the time. 2,000 returned, 1/10. The survivability, let's say from 1944 onwards, we knew exactly if you have to go to a mission, alert, that every second pilot will not come home.
Gunther, didn't you tell me that in the early spring and summer of '44, they were sending people up in the 109 who had a total of 100 hours flying time?
Sure.
Not in the 109, a total flying.
Sure. We had to.
By that time,
no
our
pilots
people were
anymore.
experienced. The people that came on later, it was like taking candy from a baby.
On April 17th, Gunther Rall arrived at Wunstorf, Germany, transferred from the Eastern Front to command No. 2 Group of JG-11. His ME-109s are charged with engaging the fighter planes that escort the American bombers. In these battles, the German fighter arm will be outnumbered by 7-1, or even 10-1. The fiercest battles are fought above Ruhr Valley, west of Berlin. American fighter pilots call this area the happy hunting ground.
Und in diesem Sommer 1970,
The situation doesn't alarm me unduly. There are around 1,000 missions and 273 victories in my logbook, a balance that's got to be worth something on any front. The Americans launch bombing raids almost daily, but JG-11 does not see any action until April 29th. On that day, JG-11's Focke-Wulf 190s shoot down 11 B-24 Liberators. Rall's 109s tangle with groups of P-51 Mustangs and P-38 Lightnings. His group shoots down 6 American fighters, but loses 5 of its own, 4 killed and 1 wounded. By the end of April, the Luftwaffe has lost another 395 fighter pilots, killed, missing, or seriously wounded.
We got young pilots. They had 1 or 2 sorties on the 109 and were put in the operation. The survivability, the chance for survive, with 3 missions in the United States.
As Germany's air defenses weakened, the Allied High Command turned its attention again to German oil production. Oil fields at Ploiești, Romania provided a quarter of Germany's oil supplies. Bombing raids on Ploiești and the mining of the Danube River drastically cut the flow of Romanian oil to Germany. And on May 12th, 8th Air Force bombers attacked Germany's synthetic oil plants. Germany's 13 synthetic oil plants provided 3/4 of its petrol and all of its aircraft fuel. Bombing raids in May cut fuel production in half. By July, every synthetic oil plant had been hit, and production was cut by 98%. From May 12 to the end of the war, German oil production averaged 9% of its capacity. For lack of fuel, the Luftwaffe cut training time to the bone and threw novice pilots into the meat grinder of the air war. Hitler's final counteroffensive in the Ardennes in December 1944 failed when his panzers ran out of gas. 3 months later, 1,200 German tanks waited at the Vistula River to block the Soviet advance. But the panzers ran out of fuel and were overrun. The May 12th air battle also saw the first use of a new fighter tactic that would accelerate the destruction of the Luftwaffe and help give the Allies undisputed control over the skies of Europe. Zemke had proposed a new fighter tactic that might offer greater protection for the bombers. Kepner named it the Zemke fan.
The basis to this tactic was to go out ahead of the bombers and intercept the Germans while they were forming up, never letting them get to the bombers.
Zemke led 3 8-plane squadrons 20 minutes ahead of the bombers to a prominent river bend near Koblenz, Germany. From there, the 3 squadrons fanned out in a 180-degree arc to sweep the Frankfurt area for German fighters. 5 minutes behind Zemke, Gabi Gabreski led a reserve force of 24 fighters. Colonel Zemke's own after-action report tells the story. Zemke wrote, "3 of us had moved out to an area north of Frankfurt when we were bounced from above by 7 Me-109s. My 2 wingmen were shot down. My escape was by outspinning and diving the enemy. As I flew westward toward home, another 4 Me-109s jumped me over Wiesbaden. I was again just able to elude the enemy. Alone, south of Koblenz, Zemke spotted another group of 4 enemy aircraft 5,000 feet below him. Others joined up, and soon there were about 30 German fighters forming up and climbing. Zemke orbited above them, calling for help to bounce them." In his report, Zemke wrote, "Finally, Lieutenant Rankin and his wingman, Lieutenant Thornton, moved up to within half a mile, and I told them to give me top cover while I bounced the enemy below." In the melee that followed, Zemke shot down 1 Me-109 and broke up another flight of 4. Rankin shot down another Me-109 that had gotten on Zemke's tail. Low on fuel, Zemke headed for home. In all, the 56th Fighter Group shot down 19 German fighters during the mission, losing just 3 of their own. Lieutenant Rankin was especially successful.
We were in flights, and we flew ahead in 15 minutes and then turned around and came back. And we covered a wide area, big area. And And as I recall, I was only about halfway back on my track, and it sounded like everybody and his brother had encountered fighters, German fighters. And it wasn't shortly after that I look up and I've got 26 or 30 109s in tight formation still carrying their tanks. And so I take my flight of 4 and press the attack. They saw me coming, and they all dropped the tanks together.
The German fighters broke and dove in all directions. Rankin followed one in a vertical dive.
We had been told if they were vertical at 5,000 feet, they couldn't pull out. Well, it helped save me because I'm screaming, that jug could, nothing could outdive it. And I'm gaining on him, and all of a sudden, his wings started to vibrate and shake and shuttle, and he splashed and went straight in, and I was able to pull out. And I remember seeing 575 indicated. It was approaching suppressibility, because it felt like it was in concrete when I grabbed that stick, cut the throttle back, and both hands to pull up and get out of there.
Climbing back up, Rankin spotted another lone German.
Down I go, splat, and watched him crash in the field. That was the second one. That was so easy. He didn't do anything. So many times when you're shooting at an airplane, they don't do anything.
Rankin and his wingman then flew to Zemke's aid, diving into the melee. Rankin shot down 2 Focke-Wulf 190s, then turned to pursue the Me-109 that was on Zemke's tail. Rankin told Zemke to brake.
He said, "Where is it?" And like a dummy, I said, "It's climbing up right under your ass." And I figured, oh boy, he'll get me when I get home for that. So I'm climbing, and I'm heading over there, and I got on this guy's tail and gave him a short burst, and I ran out of ammo. And I didn't think I had him. Well, he slid off to the right and popped the canopy and bailed out. If he hadn't done that, I couldn't have claimed it. But that was number 5.
Shorty Rankin was the first P-47 pilot in the European theater to score 5 victories in a single mission. On May 12, 1944, Gunther Rall was commanding 75 fighters of JG-11, based at Wensdorf, 250 kilometers north of Frankfurt.
Early in the morning we got alert because the Germans had out in the North Sea ships, and they were on the same frequency like the 8th Air Force, the bombers. And when they tuned their radios, they could figure out we have to expect an attack and when and how. You know, we are a group of 75 airplanes, 2 Focke-Wulf 190, and I was the top cover with a 109.
Patrolling at 33,000 feet, Rall's Staffel bounced a group of P-47s flying top cover for Zemke's squadron. Rall shot down 1 P-47. Then his 109 took hits, and his wingman was hit and bailed out.
So I was alone, and all the other ones were engaged with all different aircraft up there. Then they chased me, and this must have been the second. I attacked Zemke's leading group.
Only years later did Zemke learn that his 2 wingmen were shot down by Germany's 3rd highest scoring ace. Zemke dove to escape Rall's guns, and Rall himself was jumped by P-47s.
And they chased me, and we knew exactly the P-47 is much faster as a 109 in a dive, and had a much higher structural strength as a 109. But what can you do? I was chased by 4, almost line abreast. And I turn left, I turn in the bullets. And I turn right, turn in the bullets, and pull up the bullets. So there was no other choice, and I went down and bang, 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 and all of a sudden, bang, and the thumb was off. So I pressed the stick between my legs. It was, I want to know how when I run in the bottom, you know.
At treetop level, Rall pulled up until his battered plane stalled.
From there on, the aircraft turned upside down. I was hanging out of my cockpit and made some instinctive movements to get rid of that airplane, because it was not easy to get out of a cockpit of the 109, even not if it's upside down.
At first, Rall was tumbling wildly and could not reach the parachute release.
And all of a sudden, it was quiet. I was looking how high, and I pulled until I was on the parachute. And then I recognized, I said, "Shorty, where's my thumb?" I came down and was hanging on a tree. You know, I landed in a wood. And it was good. There was no impact on the bottom, because 1 year earlier I had broken my back 3 times, and this was dangerous. And I solved my harness, fell down, but not on water. It was a steep slope, you know, bump, 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 bump. Not a hard impact. But this is then when the farmers came, and I said, "I'm a German."
Conflicting combat reports from May 12th make it impossible to determine who shot down Gunther Rall. The evidence suggests that it was probably Lieutenant Rankin or his wingman, Lieutenant Cleon Thornton. It was the 8th time Rall had been shot down.
I get used to it, and I like that. But this was my first bailout. My first and the last one.
The mission itself, tactically, was extremely successful. Whereas the bombers were losing 10, maybe as high as 15% of their aircraft on one mission, making it very hard to resupply 8th Air Force with new crews. The fighters were so successful in intercepting the Germans and breaking them up, it fell to 4%, a 4% loss, of which half of that is estimated to have been anti-aircraft.
Colonel Zemke was not entirely pleased with the mission.
This fan, he felt, failed. His generals thought it was just brilliant. He couldn't apply top cover. The first group, A group, he escorted out on the fan. They broke up into radiuses, and they were down to elements of 2. And when he got jumped by Gunther Rall, there was just 2 of them there, and he was screaming for help. But he had staggered Gabreski 5 minutes behind him, and Gabreski was overwhelmed with the amount of Germans they had. I mean, they were breaking up German coveys, and they were going in all directions, and he could get no help.
The 56th employed the Zemke fan again on May 22nd, as its 3 16-plane squadrons fanned out ahead of the bombers. Each squadron this time had its own top cover. The group shot down 12 Germans. Zemke's squadron saw no German fighters at all. Colonel Zemke continued to innovate and refine tactics for bomber escort, ground attack, and dive bombing with P-47s.
We flooded Germany with tactics. This man helped shape these tactics. It needs to be pointed out, he didn't do it alone. It was the genius of many of his men coming up with these ideas and applying them to it.
Eligible for reassignment in late May, Lieutenant Rankin opted for a 50-hour extension with the 56th Fighter Group.
I wanted to do this because I thought something was going to happen. I figured D-Day, I didn't know what they were going to call it, but I wanted to be there and a part of that. Well, the 50 hours went by so fast. Just like that, you find 2 or 3 missions a day. And I didn't see it most of the time. I didn't have any action. I didn't get my last 50. It was the day after D-Day. I flew 3 missions on D-Day and didn't see a German fighter.
Lieutenant Rankin rotated home to the States in July 1944 after 75 combat missions and 10 aerial victories. Gunther Rall's mangled hand was a long time healing. Continued infection kept him off flight status until November '44, when he took command of the Germans' new fighter unit leader school.
We had this unit with Allied aircraft. Yeah, and thirdly, I flew them all. P-51, D-47, 38, Spitfire, as target for my own pilots, which I have to train. That was fantastic, and I'm still, this comes to my opinion that the best fighter airplane was the judging all the characteristics and criteria. The P-51 was the best one.
In August 1944, Colonel Zemke left the 56th to take command of the 479th Fighter Group. He gave command of the 56th to Dave Schilling. Zemke called all the men together.
He said he knew what he wanted to do, and he knew how he wanted it done. He expected, from the lowest rank to the highest rank, full compliance with everything there.
Zemke applied the tactics and discipline that had made the 56th a success.
The 56 had a record of 8-1. Nobody in the 8th Air Force was even close. And he told Dave, I will beat that 8-1 record, your tenure against mine. That was a challenge. And he let the 479th know that.
The 479th began flying missions deep into Germany. Under Zemke's leadership, they began to rack up scores and produce aces. During the airborne invasion of Holland in October 1944, the 479th had 27 victories and just 1 loss. By late October, Zemke had flown 153 combat missions and had 17 3/4 confirmed victories. Zemke was a highly effective yet enigmatic leader who was unable to motivate and manage those above him nearly as effectively as he did those under his command. He was reassigned to the 65th Fighter Wing as Chief of Staff. But first, he would fly one last combat mission with the 479th. On October 30th, while escorting a squadron of B-24s, Zemke's fighters were caught in a huge thunderstorm. Zemke's P-51 went into a spin and broke up. Zemke was thrown clear, still strapped in his seat, and parachuted into a swamp. He was captured, interrogated, and sent to Stalag Luft 1 in northeastern Germany, where he assumed command of more than 9,000 Allied POWs. His leadership improved conditions and morale, and ultimately saved the lives of thousands of POWs. Colonel Hub Zemke retired from the military in 1966 after several other successful commands, but it was the werewolf of Zemke's wolf pack that has left his indelible mark on history. When the war ended in Europe, Gunther Rall returned home, packed a suitcase, kissed his wife, and walked into captivity. After a brief stay in England, he returned to Vienna and faded into civilian and family life. In 1954, Rall joined the new Luftwaffe as a major and flew jet fighters. He served as a Chief of Staff for NATO Air Forces before his retirement as a Lieutenant General in 1975. A chance meeting in 1991 brought these three old adversaries together again, the beginning of deep and lasting friendships.
Gunther Rall is coming over for Germany, and Hub Zemke is coming down here to the coast of Mesa, California, from his almond ranch in California. We would like you to come out here to be with them. We're going to do a painting of that particular mission on 12 May 44. Well, I said, fine, I'd love to come. He said, we'll pay your way, we'll do all that good stuff. So that was the first time I met Gunther. We spent 5 good days together. We became friends immediately, and we have been friends ever since. And now, a couple of years back, he said, Shorty, I'll never shoot at you again.
A fighter pilot has a personal relation to his enemy. He sees him. It's man to man. Where we had the real dogfights in Russia, because you could see his face. So we respected each other. He fought for his country, I fought for his country, and we had personal contact in the air. So you have a personal relationship, and this is that the fighter pilots after the war became friends. It's typical.
I'm a very emotional guy for a fighter pilot, I'll tell you. But I love this country. And every young person who lives here ought to be blessed to know that they've been so fortunate to be born here. And when the time comes, if you have to do your thing for your country, you better damn well step up to the bat and do it. See, anybody who's so fortunate, he feels the same about his country. 3 wars and I'm still here. I'm 88. I feel fine. I'd go to tomorrow and fight, but I wouldn't fight against Gunther.
Colonel Zemke's attitude toward his enemies was shaped by his interrogation and imprisonment.
When he came out of that camp and it was liberated, my father, who's of German parents, hated Germans. He had suffered. And I think for a long period of time, he held that grudge. He went back to Germany and he met Bahr, Priller, Gunther Rall, a number of the German fighter pilots that he knew he fought against. And he opened up more and more to them. And my father's whole view of Germans and the Luftwaffe slowly changed.
In 2006, Gunther Rall published his autobiography, My Logbook. Kurt Bratz was his editor and publisher.
I remember one evening after a hard day of work when we were working on the biography, and we sat right here on under the porch, both of us with a glass of whiskey in our hands, and didn't speak for a couple of minutes. And suddenly, into the silence, he said, "You know what? I looked into the faces of most of the guys I had to kill, and tears ran down his face." And I said, "Why so?" And he said, "You know, the air war on the Eastern Front took place in altitudes below 5,000, 10,000 feet. And nobody wore an oxygen mask. And when you engaged, you came across the guy before you turned in. And I could see them, and a minute later they were dead." And that was something that surprised me really, because at first glance, he's just a cool-cut warrior, you know. But if you get to know him a bit better, and not only him, this might be true for most of the World War, or many of the World War II veterans, it really bothers them and will bother them till they do their last breath.